Holly Reyes never believed in Christmas miracles, not after losing her mother, her job, and her faith in people. But everything changed the night. A stranger knocked on her snowy cabin door, carrying the one thing she'd stopped hoping for: a reason to feel alive again. Holly Reyes never planned on spending Christmas alone, but somehow it happened anyway. The tiny cabin her mother once owned, tucked between two frost-covered pines, felt emptier than ever. She lit the old stone fireplace, watching the flames crawl up the logs, trying to ignore the silence pressing against her. Her life had fallen apart with remarkable speed. First the bookstore closed, leaving her jobless. Then her fiancé walked away without explanation, leaving behind only a note on the kitchen table. 2 months later, her mother passed, and the world lost its color entirely. Christmas, which her mother adored, felt like a holiday stolen from her. Holly came to the cabin to hide. She brought 1 suitcase, 1 blanket, and 0 plans. She told herself it was temporary, but deep down she wasn't sure she wanted to return to the busy, exhausting world she used to know. Outside, snow fell in thick, soft flakes, burying the porch, the path, the mailbox, everything. She curled up in the armchair with a cup of cocoa, trying not to think about how much she missed the life she thought she would have. The nearest neighbor was a 30-minute walk away, and her phone had 0 reception. The knock came again. She took a breath, grabbed the old iron poker from beside the fireplace, and opened the door. A man stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, dusted in snow. His cheeks were flushed from the cold, and his breath puffed out in white clouds. He looked exhausted, but his eyes, a warm honey-brown, were kind. "Sorry," he said, voice rough from the cold. "My truck slid off the road. I saw the light in your window. Could I borrow a phone? Or maybe just warm up for a minute?" Holly stared. Her heart raced, half from fear and half from surprise. But something about him didn't feel threatening, just tired. Cold, human. She stepped back. "Come in." He exhaled in relief and crossed the small threshold. When he removed his beanie, snowflakes fell onto the wooden floor. "I'm Nick," he said, offering a polite smile. "Nick Carter." "Holly," she replied. Something flickered in his eyes. "Holly, like the Christmas plant." She rolled her eyes. "Don't start." He laughed softly, the first warm sound in that lonely cabin in weeks. And for the first time in a long time, Holly felt the tiniest spark of something she thought she'd lost forever. Hope Nick's boots left watery prints on the wooden floor as he stepped closer to the fire. Holly handed him a towel, one that still faintly smelled like pine detergent, and he rubbed the snow from his hair, shoulders, and coat. "Sorry about all this," he said, glancing around the cabin. "Didn't mean to show up like some kind of Christmas horror movie character." Holly cracked a small smile. "Well, if you were dangerous, you picked the wrong house. I have a fire poker and absolutely no hesitation." Nick held up his hands. "Noted." His smile was warm, the kind that softened the tension she didn't even realize she'd been carrying. The storm outside intensified, whipping snow against the windows. Holly poured him a mug of cocoa, her mother's recipe. She hesitated before handing it over. Nick cupped it in both hands. "This is incredible." "It's just cocoa," she said. "No." He shook his head. "This tastes like someone who's had practice making people feel better." The words hit deeper than he knew. For a moment, they just listened to the crackling fire. "So," Holly said, settling on the opposite chair, "what were you doing out here?" "Nobody comes this far unless they're lost or running from something." Nick inhaled, long and slow. "Maybe a little of both." She raised a brow. He stared into the fire instead of at her. "My dad passed away last month. I needed a break from everything. The city, my job, the noise. I thought a drive through the mountains would clear my head. Didn't expect the storm to get this bad." Her expression softened. "I'm sorry about your dad." He nodded, eyes distant. "Thanks." Holly understood loss too well. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It felt shared. "You live here alone?" he asked gently. "For now." She hesitated. "It was my mom's place. She passed earlier this year." Nick looked up. "That's a lot to handle alone." Holly snorted softly. "Well, it's not like grief waits for convenient timing." He smiled, sad but understanding. Two people, both bruised by life, sitting in the warm glow of a fire, while a snowstorm tried to tear the outside world apart. Nick shifted, glancing at the window. Any chance the storm lets up soon? I'm telling you. Nick exhaled, a breath of gratitude, relief, and maybe a touch of worry. Are you sure? I'm a complete stranger. Holly shrugged. Yeah, well, the universe sent you here for a reason. He gave her a quiet look, something soft, something that lingered longer than it should have. You really believe that? He asked. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the flames. No, she admitted, but maybe I want to. Nick didn't answer. Instead, he pulled the blanket off the couch and placed it around her shoulders. Then maybe, he said gently. You're allowed to believe again. Her breath caught. Not from romance, not yet, but from the unfamiliar feeling that someone noticed her. Really noticed her, for the first time in months. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, two hearts slowly, quietly thawed. The storm didn't calm. It grew louder, pounding against the cabin like a fist trying to get in. Holly added another log to the fire, the sparks rising in a quiet burst of gold. Nick watched her as she worked, the orange glow softening her features. You do this a lot, Nick said. Keep the fire going. No, he shook his head lightly. Take care of things, even when nobody's watching. Holly felt her throat tighten. She didn't answer, didn't need to. Nick seemed to understand she wasn't ready to talk about herself yet. He wandered toward the small shelf of decorations, things Holly had refused to put away this year. A tiny ceramic sleigh, 2 knitted stockings, fairy lights still coiled in a loop. He touched the sleigh with gentle fingers. You didn't decorate the tree, he said. Holly stiffened. I wasn't going to put one up this year. Nick didn't pry. He only nodded once softly and stepped back. You know, he said after a moment. When my dad and I decorated our Christmas tree growing up, we'd argue about every single ornament. She huffed a small laugh. Why argue? Because he wanted the star on top. I wanted the goofy snowman my grandmother made. And who won? Nick smiled faintly. Depends which year you ask. There was something about the way he told stories, simple, unpolished, that made them feel human, warm. Like she could see the little boy he used to be, standing on a chair trying to hang a crooked ornament. What about you? Nick asked gently. Did you and your mom have a Christmas tradition? Holly traced her thumb along the edge of her cocoa mug. Yeah, we used to bake cookies on Christmas Eve. Burn half of them, eat the other half. Nick smiled. Sounds perfect. It was. Her voice cracked, just slightly, but enough. Nick didn't rush to comfort her. He didn't panic or force conversation. He simply sat on the couch and waited, giving her space to breathe, but staying close enough that she didn't feel alone. After a moment, he said quietly, You know, grief doesn't mean you stop living. It just means you're carrying someone with you. Holly swallowed. That sounds hard. It is, Nick admitted. But so is trying to do everything alone. The words hit deeper than she expected. She moved to sit beside him, not close, but closer than before. The fire warmed the room, but something else warmed the space between them. So, Holly said, clearing her throat, what do people do when they're snowed in with a stranger right before Christmas? Nick grinned. Well, we could talk. Or argue about Coco. Or you could tell me why your Christmas tree is still in the box. Her eyes narrowed. Bold of you to assume I'll let you guilt me into decorating. I didn't say guilt. Nick pointed to the window. I said snowed in, totally different. She rolled her eyes, but her lips were already betraying a smile. Nick pushed himself off the couch. All right then, he said, stretching his hands dramatically. I'm officially volunteering as the world's most mediocre Christmas helper. Holly blinked. You're serious? Absolutely, he said. Because decorating is easier with 2 people, and because, he paused, meeting her eyes, you shouldn't have to avoid Christmas alone. Something inside her softened, cracked, then quietly melted. Fine, she said, standing. But if the lights don't work, you're fixing them. Nick raised both hands. I will battle the lights like a soldier going to war. Holly laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in weeks. And Nick looked at her like the sound was some kind of gift. As she opened the box of decorations, brushing dust off the lid, she felt something shift. Hope not loud, not dramatic, just quietly returning. And for the first time since last Christmas, she didn't feel the weight of grief pressing on her chest. She felt something new rising instead. Possibility. The box of decoration sat open on the floor, half filled with tangled lights, mismatched ornaments, and a star Holly hadn't touched since last year. Nick knelt beside it, sleeves rolled up, looking entirely too confident for someone about to fight a battle he couldn't possibly win. Holly crossed her arms. You do realize those lights haven't worked since, well, forever. Nick lifted the knotted mess. How hard can it be? She gave him a look. Famous last words. He smirked and started tugging the wires apart. It took exactly 2 seconds for the entire string to coil itself around his wrist. Okay, he said flatly. These lights are possessed. Holly tried not to laugh, and failed miserably. It burst out of her, loud and unrestrained, the sound echoing through the small cabin. She covered her mouth, but Nick only grinned wider. There it is, he said softly. There what is? The laugh you've been hiding. Her smile faded into something gentler, something that tugged at her chest. She didn't remember the last time someone noticed that. Nick got the lights undone, somehow, and held the plug dramatically. Moment of truth. Holly braced herself. He plugged them in. Nothing. Nick stared as if betrayed by electricity itself. Then the lights flickered weakly. One bulb blinked, another sputtered. Then pop. The entire string went dark. Nick sighed. Well, we tried. Holly shook her head, amusement warming something cold inside her. Let's just decorate without the lights. He nodded, and together they sorted through ornaments. Holly handed him a small ceramic heart, one she and her mom had painted together years ago. You can put this one up, she said quietly. Nick held it with a strange kind of care, as if sensing its importance. Where does it go? Anywhere, she whispered, just not too high. He hung it gently on the fir tree. When he stepped back, the tree looked uneven, half done, not perfect, but warm. Real like home. Nick looked at her. You know, you're different than I expected. Holly raised a brow. Oh, what did you expect? He thought for a moment. A woman who hated Christmas. Someone shut down, closed off. And what do you see now? A woman trying, he said simply. So many braver than she thinks. Her breath caught. Nobody had ever said that to her, not even her mother. She turned away, suddenly overwhelmed by the way he looked at her, like he was trying to understand every part of her without prying. To distract herself, she walked to the kitchen and began rummaging for cookie supplies. You bake? Nick asked, following her. I used to, she said. Mom and I had a tradition. What kind? Holly measured flour with unnecessary force. Christmas Eve cookies. Nick leaned against the counter, watching her with a softness that made her heartbeat skip. Let's make them. She froze. You want to help? Of course, he said easily. Unless you're scared, I'll bake you. Holly scoffed. Oh please, I saw you burn toast this morning. Hey, Nick defended. That toaster was aggressive. As they mixed the ingredients, the cabin grew warmer, not from the fire, but from something less explainable. He dusted flour onto the counter. She reached for it at the same time. Their fingers brushed lightly. Holly's breath hitched. Nick didn't pull away. His eyes lifted to meet hers, dark and steady. You okay? He asked softly. She nodded, though her pulse said otherwise. Something about him, the gentleness, the warmth, the way he didn't push, made her feel safe. Seen, the cookie dough was rolled, cut placed on the tray, but neither of them moved. They stood too close, hands still near the same spot on the counter, warmth spreading between them like a slow-burning ember. Nick's voice dropped lower. You know, I don't think being snowed in with you is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. Holly swallowed. No, he murmured, not even close. Her cheeks warmed, and she looked away, not because she wanted to, but because the moment was too much, too real, too fragile. The oven beeped, breaking the tension. Nick stepped back, giving her space. You handle the cookies, he said lightly. I'll check the fire. But, as he walked away, Holly could feel the shift between them. Subtle, undeniable, and growing stronger than either of them expected. Christmas had always been a reminder of what she lost, but tonight, for the first time in a long time, it felt like a beginning. The cabin felt different the next morning, not because of the snowstorm still raging outside, but because something unspoken now lived between Holly and Nick. A warmth, a closeness. Neither dared name. Holly woke to the smell of cinnamon and something else she couldn't quite place. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and walked toward the kitchen. Nick stood at the stove, hair tousled, wearing an apron that absolutely did not belong to him. A frilly floral one Holly had forgotten existed. She blinked. "Are you wearing my grandmother's apron?" Nick glanced down at himself. "Oh, so that's why it smells like lavender and judgment." "You laughed," he pointed out. Mission accomplished. She shook her head, but she couldn't deny it. Seeing him there, cooking in her kitchen, made the cabin feel less like a place of isolation and more like company comfort. Something dangerously close to home. "What are you making?" she asked, stepping closer. "Christmas French toast." She raised a brow. "Since when do you cook anything that isn't burnt?" Nick placed a plate in front of her. "Since I decided not to embarrass myself in front of someone whose approval I want." Holly froze. Approval, want. The words lingered between them longer than they should have. She sat down, suddenly too aware of how close he was as he joined her at the table. The first bite tasted better than she expected. Warm, soft, sweet, comforting in a way breakfast hadn't been for her in years. "This is," she paused, trying not to sound impressed. "Really good." Nick leaned back with a smug grin. "I accept your apology." "I didn't apologize. It was implied." "No, it wasn't." Nick reached over and gently wiped a crumb from the corner of her lips with his thumb. A small, simple touch, yet her heart immediately kicked against her ribs. Her breath caught. Nick's hand lingered a second too long. Then he drew back, clearing his throat. "Crumb," he said softly. "Right," she whispered. "A crumb." Silence settled. Not awkward, but charged. Then Holly stood abruptly. "I should check the generator." Nick raised a brow. "In the middle of a blizzard." "Well, someone has to. I'll go with you." "No," she said too quickly. "I'll be fine." Nick folded his arms. "Holly, the snow is knee-deep, and the wind could knock down a moose. You're not going alone." She tried to argue, but he was already grabbing his coat and gloves. Holly sighed and bundled up as well. Outside, the world looked like a frozen dream. White, wild, endless. Snowflakes stung their cheeks, and the cold bit through their coats. But Nick stayed close, matching her step for step. When Holly slipped slightly on an icy patch, he grabbed her waist instantly. "Careful," he murmured, his voice close against her ear. "I'm fine," she said breathlessly, though she wasn't sure if it was the slip or his hands that stole her breath. He didn't let go immediately, and she didn't ask him to. The generator shed was half buried in snow. Holly crouched beside it, brushing off frost, but her gloves were soaked, and her fingers numb. Nick knelt beside her. "Let me." "Nick, I know how to." "Holly." His tone softened. "Let me take care of something for once." Something inside her cracked. A quiet, fragile thing she'd been guarding for years. Since losing her mom, she'd done everything alone, because no one else stayed long enough to help. She released the tools. Nick fixed the generator while she watched, snow piling on their coats. When it sputtered back to life, Holly exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "See," Nick said lightly, "we make a good team." She turned to him slowly. Snow clung to his hair. His cheeks were red from the cold. And yet he smiled at her, like she was the warmest thing in the world. Her voice came out softer than intended. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Nick blinked. "Because I want to be." "That's not a reason." "Yes, it is," he said quietly. "You deserve kindness, even if you don't believe it." Her throat tightened. "Nobody has said that to me in a long time." Nick stepped closer, brushing snow gently from her shoulder. "I'm not nobody." The wind howled around them, but all Holly felt was him, steady, warm, unfaltering. Their faces were inches apart, too close. Not close enough. Nick exhaled, the warmth of his breath mixing with the bitter cold. "Holly," she swallowed. "Nick." For a heartbeat, it felt like the world tilted, like they stood at the edge of something fragile and terrifying and breathtaking. But Holly stepped back, just one small step. Nick didn't follow. He just nodded, as if he understood too much. She wasn't ready, not yet. "Let's go inside," she said. "It's freezing." Nick's voice was unreadable. "Yeah, let's go." As they walked back through the storm, the distance between them felt heavier than the snow beneath their feet, but even from a step behind her, Holly felt it, the pull, the warmth, the quiet, growing truth neither of them could deny anymore. Something was happening between them, and it scared her more than anything. The morning after Lady Eleanor had saved the Duke of Ashworth from utter social ruin unfolded with a strange, almost breathless quiet. The storm outside Ravenscroft Manor had passed, yet the storm inside its walls had only begun for the first time in years. Eleanor awoke with her heart pounding not from dread, but from something far more dangerous, a man's voice, his voice. "You deserve more than you allow yourself to hope for." Those words haunted her with a warmth she had no defense against. Still wrapped in the faint chill of dawn, she sat up, the duvet falling away from her shoulders, as a strange realization washed over her. She was no longer simply the invisible spinster everyone dismissed. Last night, the Duke had seen her, and worse, she had allowed him to. When Eleanor descended the staircase hours later, she found him waiting, standing near the tall French windows, coat unbuttoned, hair slightly disheveled, an image of masculine elegance that made her breath catch painfully in her chest. He turned the instant he sensed her. "Lady Eleanor, Your Grace." Silence stretched between them like an unspoken confession. Then he stepped closer, his voice low. "You should not have defended me as you did last night. You would have been ruined if I hadn't. You put yourself at risk." His jaw flexed. "And for what? I have given you nothing but trouble." His words were sharp, but his eyes, oh, his eyes were full of something else. Gratitude, devotion, fear. "Your Grace," she whispered, "you forget that I am a woman who has lived 7 years under society's disapproval. Their judgment ceased to frighten me long ago." A breath left him, half frustration, half awe. "You are impossible," he murmured. "And you," she replied, "are reckless." The corner of his mouth twitched, not a smile. Something softer, more dangerous. "If I were reckless," he said slowly, "I would tell you the truth." Her pulse stilled. "What truth?" "That when you walked into that ballroom last night, I felt something I have not felt in years." Her hand trembled on the back of a velvet chair. "Your Grace," she managed, "please, if you do not mean it." He crossed the remaining distance between them in 3 long strides. "Do I look like a man who does not mean every word?" His voice had dropped to a deep, trembling whisper. "You have unsettled me, Eleanor. More than war, more than scandal, more than any threat society can throw." Her breath caught. "Why me?" she whispered, voice barely sound. He studied her, slowly, reverently, like a man memorizing a secret he had searched years for. "Because you ask nothing of me," he said, "and yet you make me want to give you everything." Her heart nearly stopped, just as he lifted a hand, hesitant, as though seeking permission to touch her. A loud bang echoed through the manor. The Duke stiffened. What was that? Before she could answer, the butler appeared, pale and breathless. "Your Grace, there is a visitor at the gates. Insists on speaking with you urgently." Lord Redmayne, the one man who had openly despised the Duke for years. The man who had attempted to expose him last night in the ballroom. The Duke's entire demeanor changed. His expression shuddering, his shoulders turning rigid, his voice lowering with a chilling authority. "Prepare my study." "Of course, Your Grace." The butler hurried off. Eleanor looked up at him. "Ashworth, be careful." His gaze snapped back to her, with startling intensity. "Do not worry for me." Then softer, "But do not leave this room. I don't trust Redmayne's intentions." "Why would he come here?" she whispered. A shadow crossed the Duke's features. "Because the truth is far more dangerous than last night's scandal," he said. "And Redmayne knows it." Her blood ran cold. "What truth?" He hesitated, just one heartbeat too long. Then, quietly, "The truth you saved me from yesterday is only the beginning." Before she could ask more, he reached out, finally brushing the back of his fingers against hers in a fleeting touch that ignited her nerves. A promise, a warning, a confession left unfinished. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Eleanor standing alone in the morning room, with her heart whispering a truth she could no longer deny. She was falling in love with a man surrounded by secrets, and this time, she feared she might not survive the consequences. The day after the disastrous encounter with Lord Redmayne was strangely quiet. Eleanor stayed mostly in her room. Not because she was afraid, but because everything inside her felt unsettled, like someone had shaken up all her thoughts and left them floating around without order. She sat near the window, looking out at the snow-covered hedges of Hawthorne Manor, thinking about one thing only. Why had the Earl reacted like that? Why had his voice broken? Why had he looked at her with a kind of pain she didn't understand? She replayed their brief conversation again and again, his frustration, his anger, his refusal to speak the truth. Eleanor wasn't the sort of woman who chased after answers, but she also wasn't someone who could sit quietly while a mystery dragged her heart along. And Lord Hawthorne had become a mystery, a frustrating, impossible, infuriating mystery. Later that evening, the household grew quiet after supper. Snow tapped softly against the windows. Servants retired early, candles dimmed. Eleanor stepped out into the hallway, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders, and moved down the long corridor toward the library. For some reason, something told her he would be there, and he was. The Earl sat in one of the large leather chairs near the fire, a single candle flickering on the side table. He wasn't reading, he wasn't writing, he wasn't even resting. He was simply staring into the flames, shoulders tense, jaw clenched, as if waiting for someone, or trying desperately not to think. Eleanor stood at the doorway for a moment before speaking. "Lord Hawthorne." He didn't look at her immediately, but his hands tightened on the armrest. "Miss Ashford," he said finally, "you should be asleep." She stepped inside anyway. "I couldn't, not after last night." His expression darkened. "Eleanor, if this is about Redmayne—" "It is," she interrupted softly, "and it's about you." He closed his eyes. It was the smallest movement, but it told her more than anything else. He was tired, emotionally drained, maybe even afraid of what she might say. "Tell me the truth," she said gently. "Why did you react like that? What does Lord Redmayne have to do with you, or me?" He rose from the chair slightly, as if deciding whether to walk away, but then he stopped. "You really want the truth?" His voice was low, not angry, not cold, but raw. "Yes." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once before stopping again. "It isn't a story you will enjoy. I'd prefer the truth to silence," Eleanor said. "Even if it hurts." That made him look at her, truly look at her. And then, something inside him seemed to give way. He sat back down. This time, he didn't avoid her eyes. "Redmayne once courted my younger sister." Eleanor felt her breath catch. He had a sister. "She was 18. He continued, voice steady but hollow. "Ne fave, kind, far too trusting of charming men who wore smiles like armor." Eleanor said nothing. She sensed that if she spoke, he might stop. Redmayne ruined her reputation. Promises, lies, manipulation, every method he had. And when she believed he would offer marriage, he withdrew, publicly, cruelly. Eleanor felt a cold ache settle in her chest. "What happened to her?" she whispered. Lord Hawthorne's jaw tightened. "She didn't survive the humiliation." Eleanor's heart broke. She took ill and... His voice cracked for the first time. "She died, believing she was a burden." The fire flickered. Snow drifted harder against the windows. Eleanor could barely breathe. "And that," he said, looking directly at her, "is why I reacted the way I did. I will never allow that man to hurt another woman under my roof." A long silence followed. A deep, painful, honest silence. Eleanor stepped closer. She didn't know why, whether it was instinct, compassion, or something far deeper. But she reached out and placed her hand gently over his. It startled him. The Earl looked at her hand as if he'd never felt someone else's kindness before. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Not because you owe me the story, but because you carried it alone." He swallowed hard, but didn't pull away. "You remind me of her," he admitted quietly. "Not in appearance, but in spirit. You don't deserve cruelty or risk." His voice dipped lower. "And I am not a man who offers safety easily." Eleanor didn't look away. "And yet," she said, "I have never felt unsafe with you." That stunned him. He opened his mouth slightly, closed it again, then looked at her with something new, something softer, something he clearly didn't want but couldn't stop. "Eleanor." he whispered. Don't say things you don't understand. She stepped even closer. Then explain them to me. For the first time, he did not move away. Instead, he leaned back slightly, as if her presence overwhelmed him. The flames reflected in his eyes, softening the harshness that usually lived there. You're changing things in this house, he murmured. In my life, in me, her heartbeat stumbled. And I don't know if it's safe for either of us. Eleanor felt her chest tighten, not with fear, but with something much warmer. I'm not asking for safety, she said quietly. I'm asking for honesty, whatever it costs. He stared at her for so long she thought he might refuse. Instead, he whispered 4 words that changed everything. I care for you, not passionately, not dramatically, not even confidently, but truthfully, painfully, honestly. And Eleanor felt the world shift. But before she could answer, footsteps echoed far down the hallway, loud ones, urgent ones. A servant appeared at the doorway, breathless. My lord, Lord Redmayne is here. He demands to speak with you. He says it concerns Miss Ashford. The Earl froze. Eleanor felt her blood run cold. The snow fell harder that evening, turning Hawthorne Manor into a ghostly white fortress. The lamps cast golden halos across the frosted windows. But inside, Eleanor's heart felt anything but warm. Her hand still trembled from the Earl's confession the night before. 4 words, I care for you. She had repeated them endlessly in her mind. But now a new worry gnawed at her. Lord Redmayne had arrived. She didn't know whether to feel fear, anger, or relief. Eleanor and the Earl waited in the drawing room. The door firmly closed behind them. A moment of tense silence filled the air before Redmayne was announced. The servant's voice shook, almost betraying the storm of emotions outside the walls. When Redmayne entered, his confident, careless smile was gone. His eyes darted nervously, first to Eleanor, then to the Earl. Lord Hawthorne, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. I have come to speak of a misunderstanding. Hawthorne's eyes narrowed. His hand gripped the armrest of his chair, as if he were holding back a storm. This is no misunderstanding, he said quietly, voice cold and precise. This is about the harm you've caused, about the lives you've endangered and ruined, and I will not allow it to continue. Especially not here. Eleanor's pulse quickened. Redmayne's gaze flicked to her, and for a brief second, she saw the arrogance she had despised before. But this time, it was mixed with fear. Fear of the Earl and fear of the truth, finally catching up to him. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice steady, despite the trembling in her chest. Lord Redmayne, she said, you think you can intimidate us with your charm and connections, but your actions are what define you. You hurt people, you manipulate people, and now you will face the consequences. Redmayne's smile faltered. Consequences? You are only a woman, Miss Ashford. What can you possibly do? Hawthorne finally spoke, rising from his chair. The air seemed to thrum with the weight of his presence. Redmayne, he said, you will leave this house immediately. You will apologize for the harm you have caused, and never cross paths with Miss Ashford again. Or I will ensure that everyone in London knows the truth about your schemes. Redmayne's lips pressed into a thin line. He looked between Eleanor and the Earl, realizing for the first time that his usual tricks held no power here. With a stiff bow, he turned on his heel and left the manor, the snow swallowing his retreating figure. Silence fell over the room. Eleanor exhaled, her body sagging in relief. Hawthorne turned to her, his eyes softer than she had ever seen them. You handled that well, he said, voice low and sincere. I didn't think you would speak so boldly. Eleanor shook her head, a small smile tugging at her lips. You gave me the courage to do it. That matters more than anything. He stepped closer. Eleanor, I have been reckless, closed off, and unwilling to let anyone close. But you changed that. You made me realize that protecting someone isn't the same as controlling them. And he paused, searching her eyes. I care for you, truly. Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest, the lingering fear of the past giving way to hope. And I care for you, she admitted softly. The snow continued to fall outside, but inside Hawthorne Manor, the storm had passed. Eleanor and the Earl sat by the fire, hands intertwined. No grand declarations were needed, no elaborate gestures. They had faced the storm, confronted the past, and found each other in the quiet aftermath. London may have whispered, society may have speculated, but inside these walls, two hearts had finally found their peace. And for Eleanor and the Earl, that was everything.